Good afternoon. Welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. Brian Gerrish, your host, and with me, of course, is Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well,
how's the weather?
Well's the weather? It's very, very cold here in UK. Well, on the scale of things, it's cold for us, 2.5 degrees Celsius, according to the gadget in my car. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But stiff easterly breeze bringing the temperature down, generally overcast, and people looking a bit huddled. And we had a flurry of snow last night, which of course pleased you.
Well, I didn't get it.
You didn't get it
No.
Plymouth, no. But of course we have a feeling that we are going to see some very cold weather in UK for the start of the new year. So let's see what happens. Well, we've got quite an interesting little lineup today. We're going to start off with our old favourites, the BBC, if I can call them up. And this was a very interesting little article from the good old Mail. And the headline there, in case you can't read it, is BBC Bunker, new studios built in bomb-proof room to protect from suicide attacks. And this is a story well worth having a look at, because it's telling us that the BBC has spent roughly £1 billion on a new studio complex. And within the complex is a bomb-proof reporting studio, which is going to protect them against the odd suicide bomber that's going to wander in. How's
that going to do that exactly?
Well,
since suicide bombers tend to go inside places in order to...
Well, this is the thing. You can come into the main foyer, but the secret bomb-proof bunker is actually underneath the foyer. And they're pretty confident that that's going to protect BBC journalists from these rampant attacks. Now, presumably the BBC, to spend that amount of money on a bomb-proof studio, must be suspecting violence and bombs within UK. This doesn't surprise us, as they're doing a very good job of helping stoke up the trouble across the world at the moment, as we'll be seeing.
So how much did this Fura bunker cost?
Well, all the information in the paper is that the whole facility is about £1 billion, and apparently that's going to save the BBC and therefore the taxpayer 750 million. So I'm not quite sure how this works, but do read the article, because a BBC spokesperson has said that this new £1 billion facility will allow them to produce better graphics and captions. We wonder why the BBC can't use the same software that we do. Okay, well, we'll move on. Serious stuff is breaking out now in Africa, of course, with the French. And what are they up to, Mike?
So, as reported by the BBC, I just thought we would have them on for a laugh here.
Well, we don't want to be accused of bias against the BBC.
So, France pledges short campaign against Islamists. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius has said that France's involvement in a campaign in Mali will last a matter of weeks. Apparently, he was speaking to the French media, and he rejected any parallel with the protracted mission, Western mission in Afghanistan. He said later on, we can come as backup, but we have no intention of staying forever. Well, I think they probably have exactly that intention.
If we just set the scene here, the French are uncomfortable that they're seeing activity from rebels who they're claiming are Al-Qaeda linked.
Well, we shall come on to that in a second. So the British, in the meantime, our government has decided that we're going to support the French logistically, and this seems to be just about all we can do at the moment, is to support people logistically. And of course, in Syria, we're supporting the terrorists logistically, but in this case, it's France. You may have an opinion about whether those words are interchangeable or not. But anyway, Britain has also reportedly put drones and spy planes on standby, but their main support is to provide 2 C-17s. Apparently one of them broke down already, so they've actually only managed to supply 1 C-17 so far. That C-17 has gone over to France to pick up material to take over to Mali.
So what we're actually seeing here, of course, is Cameron honouring his 50-year military partnership with the French. So
yeah.
We're not just now in the game of trying to sort out our own foreign problems. We've now got to actually do as the French tell us.
Right. Well, then the New York Times then had this article saying French strikes in Mali supplant the caution of the US. The New York Times is starting to hint at the bottom of, getting to the bottom of what's actually going on here, because let's make no mistake about this. What's going on in Mali at the moment is the result of the policy of the US, the United Kingdom, and the French. It's a continuation of what happened in Libya. We kicked Gaddafi out. We armed the Al-Qaeda-based insurgents in Libya, and these guys have all gone down to Mali and starting trouble down there. So this whole Mali thing is as a direct consequence of our involvement in Libya with the French and with the Americans.
Yeah, and perhaps we should add in here, of course, and many people don't realise that over many years there has been a marked regionalisation campaign being carried on in Africa, which is to destroy states, sovereign states, just the same as within Europe. So Africa is being regionalised, and of course under the European Union suprastate, that is to include not only Africa but also Russia. So please do your homework on this, but documents were released by the European Union a few years ago where they were actually showing maps and talking about the fact that the ultimate objective is for Africa to become part of the European Union.
I just wanted to say a bit more about what the New York Times said on this. They said, for years the United States tried to stem the spread of Islamic militancy in the region by conducting its most ambitious counter-terrorism program. It says but as insurgents swept through the desert last year, commanders of the United States, of the United States elite military units, they took with them the fruits of American training. They took with them the arms. This is the point I was just making. But then it says that an American trained officer overthrew Mali's elected government. So the Americans train up these terrorists. They head off down to Mali. They overthrow the elected government. And isn't this what normally goes on in sub-Saharan Africa? We throw out anybody that's capable of actually running a country, and we replace them with extremists or tin pot dictators.
Yeah.
It's exactly what's happened. So now the French have intervened, but this is our mess. We created it, and it's more sort of divide and conquer politics going on. Keep these people down.
Absolutely. As the supranational state is built is the key part of it. But of course we're now tied in with the French, and there was no vote in Westminster on the 50-year partnership, military partnership with the French, but it was decided behind closed doors with members of the Franco-British Council and the British ambassador in Paris, as the UK column has exclusively revealed. So that takes us to another
So in the meantime,
violence.
Exactly, as we're supporting one lot of terrorists, we're supporting another lot. So the ongoing conflict in Syria is causing a staggering humanitarian crisis. This is according to the to various aid groups and whatnot in Syria.
Didn't Mr. Haig say that we were actually saving lives in Syria? We were about saving lives, so we were providing weapons and.
Yeah, it's a bit ironic, that, isn't it? But anyway, the 600,000 Syrians have fled the country, according to the International Rescue Committee. They're calling the levels of sort of violent crime, setting aside the actual conflict, rape and murder and other things that are going on in that country, is horrific. And we've got horrific weather conditions as well over there, as Patrick was mentioning last week. That's an extremely bad situation continuing. But this humanitarian crisis, of course, is going to be used as the excuse for our greater involvement in the region. Yeah,
and interestingly, at the weekend, I bumped into a gentleman from the BBC who was down in the West Country. We had a little discussion, and I simply said to him, why is it that the BBC wasn't actually reporting what was happening in Syria accurately? And he looked at me very surprised and a little bit hurt and said, well, why do you say that? And I said, well, basically because the BBC will not get to grips with what is really happening. And he said, well, I can't see that. It seems that our reporting is perfectly reasonable and unbiased. And I said, well, perhaps you're starting to believe your own reality. Presumably when BBC is fully installed in its new bunker, they can go into a total bunker mentality.
Well, indeed.
So, but we're going to solve the military problems with a private army.
Well, I nearly fell out of my chair this morning as I heard an interview on BBC Radio 4 Today. People might think that I'm listening and reading too much of the BBC, but I'd like to know what they're up to, you know. And it seems that a company called Typhon is going to be behind Britain's first private navy in almost 200 years. And what's going on here is that this organisation, Typhon, is attempting to get permission from the government to fly the British flag over its operations. And basically they will be using Somali pirates as the excuse for commissioning 10 what are currently non-military ships, commissioning them with marines and firearms and I would presume some kind of other weaponry on the ships themselves in order to face off against various pirates around the the east coast of Africa. But of course, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is this is the East India Company beginning to rebuild itself.
Well, it's actually the navy of the bankers, isn't it?
Exactly.
Is what we're starting to see. But of course, the other extremely worrying thing is that many of these private companies are now recruiting ex-service people, Royal Marines, Army, Special Forces, on huge rates of pay in order to go fighting pirates, which means that those people aren't in Britain. And my view is that this is a deliberate government policy to keep properly trained people out of this country while we are attacked by our own government. And perhaps we should have a in-depth look at that in due course in one of the programmes. Our favourite gentleman, which must be Mr. Cameron, of course.
So our favourite Cabbage Patch doll is apparently not blackmailing the European Union over a referendum. And it all seems, looking at the media coverage of this through various newspapers, there seems to be different views about where he actually stands. Is he a skeptic? Is he not a skeptic? It seems to be a bit unclear exactly where Cameron stands, and perhaps that's a reflection of the fact that he maybe doesn't know himself.
Well, probably he's being told different things, but if just keep that image up a second, I think this headline is absolutely correct. He's not blackmailing Europe over an EU referendum. He's blackmailing the British public, is what he's doing. But yes, I can believe that behind the scenes he's getting conflicting instructions from Kenneth Clarke and
Peter Mandelson, was it?
Could well be. The Express here talking about a referendum, of course, and this is part of what you're talking about, Mike. 1 minute the talk is of a referendum, the next minute there isn't going to be a referendum. So an Express article here where it's saying that basically Mr. Cameron's going to hold out on the prospect of a referendum. So he talks referendum, but when anybody says, well, when are we going to have it? Well, that'll be at some future date.
Well, my view is that what's actually going on here is that he's dangling this carrot of a referendum over people, and as people go to grab for it, he just pulls it away from them. So they grab for it harder, and they grab for it harder, and they grab for it harder. People are going to, in a few years' time, going to be demanding this with such vehemence.
And then you fix the question.
And then you fix the question, and you fix the result. That's exactly what's going on here, I believe.
So this is the work of a liar and a fraudster in committing fraud against...
playing psychological games with the public.
If we have a look in a bit more detail about what Mr. Cameron has to say, this is The Guardian here, of course, that Cameron's been talking about the beating heart of Britain wants less interference. Well, I think many people in Britain are now waking up to the fact that the European Union is corrupt. It hasn't got a set of audited accounts for 17 years. The euro's in crisis. We've got rioting on the streets. We've got massive unemployment, particularly of young people. But this is what Mr. Cameron has to say. If we just have a look at this, I think people, what he's talking about is they want Europe fixed. They want that fixed, and they want more of a say. And we shouldn't be frightened of involving the British people in a proper debate about Europe. You notice how Cameron distances himself from actually being Britain. He talks in almost detached third party. We shouldn't be frightened. It's not us. He's not part of it. He talks about the British people. I think he's from a different sort of people, really. And then he goes on to say here, I think the beating heart of Britain, as it were, is that we would need, that we know we would need to be in Europe because we're a trading nation. These are our neighbours. These are friendly countries we should be cooperating, working with. But we're not happy with every aspect of the relationship. There are a few teething problems. There isn't crisis in the money. There isn't crisis with employment. There isn't crisis with the economy. There's just a bit too much bossiness. This is insulting, isn't it, for the ordinary person. And of course, Miliband jumps on the bandwagon. He's now waxing lyrical about Rifkin or one of the other Tory people. So all of a sudden, we're seeing the true colours. It doesn't matter what political party you're involved in.
That was Heseltine, wasn't it?
Heseltine,
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So Ed Miliband praising Heseltine, who of course is saying that we should stay in Europe. So they talk party politics, but behind the scenes, there's simply a conspiracy to draw us into Europe, I think is what's going on. And of course, the big man of the moment is Eric Pickles. We can see he's virtually as wide as Cameron is tall in this picture. But of course, Pickles is now saying, well, of course, yeah, we should have a referendum. So whether the papers are doing this deliberately or not, but it's propaganda, isn't it? It's playing with the minds of the country. We're going to have it, we're not, we will, we won't. Yeah. And we'll come back on to this business of perhaps who's controlling the country. So Pickles has been talking about houses here, I think. So
sticking with Pickles, he's again attempting to wind up the population really, and push people into becoming ever more angry about the immigration situation, and with good reason in this case. I mean, we're now talking about Bulgarians and Romanians on their way over, putting more pressure on the housing market. Apparently, there's so many agendas behind this particular article. One is to enrage the population. One is the fact that they're pushing for more and more housing to be built on greenbelt land and try to boost the sort of new builds that are going on. And they're attempting to keep the pressure inside the housing market by making sure that there are plenty of people demanding homes to rent and so on. So many agendas behind this particular article, and I don't believe that Eric Pickle is warning of anything really.
No, he's just stirring up the rhetoric. This is Alinsky. This is absolute Alinsky tactics, which is to keep people's minds disturbed, and so they're uncertain as to what's going on. But we got a little bit of a clue from an article here. I think this is actually the Mail again, but it's talking about Steve Hilton. He's been away in the States, and aside from teaching people, that must be some pretty interesting lessons there, but he's been talking about his time in the government, and he revealed that ministers spend only 30% of their time dealing with government priorities, 40% are spent handling diktats from the European Union, and the rest is on random things, which were not anything to do with the government, with the coalition agreement. But more significantly than this is he's saying that very often Mr. Cameron would wake up in the morning and listen to the news, or he would, and they're amazed that there is policy being talked about which clearly has not been discussed in government. So this man, I think, is either deliberately or accidentally really beginning to give us a look at who is controlling the country, because he's saying that policy is being made up around the elected MPs. So we come back into the civil service, and we'll just push the point, because Friday we took an in-depth look at this lady, Lynn Homer, and of course if there's trouble with the nation's border at the moment, this lady has done a great deal to making sure that total chaos exists on UK border controls. So she first of all messed up Birmingham City Council, where elections held under her hand were described as a banana republic. She was promoted into the border agency, so it's not difficult to say why have there been huge problems with the borders, because this woman leaves Birmingham basically for incompetence, and then she destroys the border agency. That was commented on. Then she's pushed over to transport. Well, we know the state of the transport system at the moment. and then to make sure that she can really get into the substance of the country, she's in HM Revenue and Customs. And Sir Gus O'Donnell, head of the Civil Service, thought that all of this was a very good career progression. Well, he would do, because he's also trying to destroy the country at the moment. But what we pointed out is, in a series of emails, Lynn Homer was busy setting up meetings with Common Purpose in order to discuss not only what she's doing, but what the Common Purpose agenda is. And we talked to HMRC media team, and this is the reply that they sent back. No training was given by Common Purpose staff in 100 Parliament Street. The Churchill Room is a meeting room in a government secure building that's available for all HMRC and Treasury staff to reserve for meetings. Members of staff can invite external guests to speak, attend and deliver training in such rooms where that would help deliver a better service to our customers. And then it goes on to wax lyrical about Lynn Homer and what she can do in delivering the department's strategic objectives. Well, actually what the department was asked was to explain why there were a series of very friendly, cosy emails where clearly political charity Common Purpose, which Eric Pickles has said the public sector should not involve themselves, was busy dealing with Lynn Homer to set up meetings to discuss policy and what Common Purpose's political agenda is. So if you want to know who's controlling the country, take a really good look at Common Purpose and the other third sector charities and non-governmental organisations. And the important thing to remember, of course, is they're funded. And that brings us straight into the banks.
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs, Julia Middleton of Common Purpose, is one of her favourite banks, I think.
Well, they seem to give her lots of money for some reason.
Well, and Deutsche Bank, of course.
Yeah. So it seems like they're rewarding themselves £8.3 billion in bonuses this year. That's nice for them.
£250,000 for each employee.
But that's on average, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I noticed in some press coverage that some of the City of London banks this year are putting off the actual delivery of these bonuses until after April, when the top rate of tax reduces again. So they're avoiding paying out the bonuses at this time of year in order to avoid that few percent extra tax.
But if you're a bank and you're controlling the politicians, you own Tony Blair if you're JP Morgan, or if you're Rothschild, you're having regular meetings with both sides, or your Common Purpose Deutsche Bank, or your Goldman Sachs and all your connections, you haven't got to worry about these things, have you?
No, and when you're utterly corrupt and found to be fraudulent, you don't need to worry about going to prison either.
No, and of course if you get into trouble, then as we see from the Mirror here, all that happens is you get bailed out by the general public. So that's you and I and all the good viewers and listeners today. And of course here we've got Lloyds also paying them out themselves out bonuses. So the head of bailed out Lloyds is just about to get to 2 million, although they're going to lose £1.4 billion of money this year. And
so they're going to make a £1.4 billion loss this year, but they're still paying multi-million-pound bonuses.
And 40% of that money is now public money, I believe. So basically it's fraud and corruption. It's right in our faces. The fact that the politicians don't deal with it tell us very simply that our politicians are also corrupt.
Well, what's good to see is that there's more and more momentum building behind the way to deal with it within the City of London. This is Liam Halligan, who is a City of London man, talking in the Telegraph on Saturday. He's pointing out that ring fencing and quantitative easing were the main response to the financial crisis of 2007-2008. But he goes on to say in his blog post here that both QE and ring fencing are a disaster waiting to happen. He says that until the zombified mega banks are put out of their misery, the UK will grow only at an extremely sluggish pace, if at all. And without a Glass-Steagall style separation of commercial investment banking, we're doing nothing but lining ourselves up for another disastrous collapse. And then he goes on to ask, will that disastrous collapse happen? And we'll just have to wait and see. Well, I would argue that we don't just have to wait and see. We need to be actively campaigning for these banks to be broken up and put the UK out of its misery, really. I mean, forget, the investment banks need to be allowed to fail. The retail banks or the banking sector that we find useful should be protected in some way, but we need to get, weed out.
Brought within the law.
Brought within the law. We need to weed out the mis-selling scandals. We need to weed out the corruption. But it starts with Glass-Steagall, and it's good to see people even within the financial establishment calling for it.
Yeah. Pensions.
Right, so we've been talking about this for quite a bit in the last few weeks, but the government has now announced that the new flat rate style state pension is expected to start in 2017. And I put the BBC article up here because I find it slightly disingenuous. And it may not be surprising.
What, the BBC?
Yeah, I mean, they're
disingenuous.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, they're basically presenting propaganda here. Because they're pointing out that the weekly payment will be £144, plus inflation rises between now and 2017. But of course, there aren't going to be any inflation rises between now and 2017 because that's been capped at 1%, which is not an inflation rise, is it? Or at least it's not with inflation rise.
One.
Yes. Yeah. But what they're saying here is that the current full state pension is £107.45 a week, but can be topped up to £142.70 with pension credit and by the second state pension. And they're almost implying that this £144 a week is a great thing. But of course, what they're not telling us is that A, we have to work longer in order to get it, and B, we're going to have to pay more national insurance in order to get it. So this is not such a great deal. And basically, what they're doing is they're scrapping the pension credit, they're scrapping the so-called second pension, state second pension, and they're setting a same rate for everybody. We'll all have to pay more national insurance, we'll have to work longer, and of course, there's still the matter of the £2.5 trillion black hole of money not paid by the Brown and Blair governments.
Well, there's only ever a problem with public money when it's to do with some form of care, caring for people. Of course, pension, very important. We haven't got enough money for this, but every other initiative the government, particularly Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Mali, of course, we've got money for that.
Yeah,
it's a lie.
And then we come to Jaguar Land Rover announcing 800 new jobs. Now, this is good news, of course, but and I couldn't bring myself to put the BBC article up, but basically this is being driven by the Chinese market. Now, I don't know whether you've seen this in the last couple of days, but the news broadcasts on TV have been showing the state of Beijing and parts of China with the pollution levels of pollution that they've got. So Jaguar Land Rover and other car manufacturers are absolutely relying on China to bail them out because they're not selling any cars in the UK or in Europe or in the United States. So they're relying on the Chinese market, and that's what's driving these 800 jobs. Now, what isn't being particularly pushed is the point that these jobs are not permanent full-time jobs. They are full-time jobs, but they last for 1 year, and after a year we will see. But I'm simply highlighting the fact that all the eggs are going into one basket here, and that is China, and China may not be in a position to buy those eggs in the not too distant future.
And I've forgotten, but who owns Jaguar and Land Rover? Because it's not a British company, is it? Is it Ford, or somebody will tell us fairly shortly?
It seems to change on a regular basis.
Well, what we've seen is, of course, the British car manufacturing industry absolutely destroyed. So when we're talking about building cars and it being good for the British nation, it's in fact good for the overseas owner of the countries. I can't remember whether it's BMW.
No, I think it's Richie here saying it's Tata. It's Tata. The same company that owns Sheffield Steel and whatnot.
Right, so we're not sure whether it's the Germans or the Americans or India, but this is apparently good for Britain. Well, we're not sure, Mr. Cameron.
Okay, energy. This is a report that came out of the Royal Society and basically saying that the UK is underestimating the amount of electricity that could be generated from tidal sources. And they're saying that, estuary barrages and tidal streams could provide up to 20% of the UK's generating capacity. That its costs are relatively high, but then they're not as high as wind. But you know, the main problem with this, with tidal, I believe, if you have to have a renewable policy, then it should be tidal or you know, certainly not wind, and certainly not solar in the UK anyway. But the problem is that the environmentalists and others are absolutely out against tidal power. And so, for example, this Severn Barrage, the Severn Barrage could provide up to 5% of, in one project, could provide up to 5% of the UK's generating capacity. Our generating capacity at the moment is 80 gigawatts. So 5% of that could be provided by the Severn Barrage, but this project is currently being blocked because angling, wildlife and heritage groups dispute claims by developers that the proposal is environmentally friendly. And I find it a bit ironic that we're shouting about global warming on one hand and how we've got to deal with the environmental problems of the world on one hand, but on the other hand we can't do things because they're not environmentally friendly in a slightly different way. And again, you know, from this is Somerset, this is from November. This is again the Bristol, the Severn Barrage. Renewable energy experts, which renewable energy experts and also business leaders claiming that that this is no good for bird life really and fish. And the quote from the previous article it's amazing. It's basically saying this proposal could have a devastating impact on Britain's most popular participatory sport. So we don't build this because it could have an impact on a participatory sport. But the one project which is operational is the one in Strangford Lough, which is in Northern Ireland, and it's a bit sad, really. You know, we've got the situation where the UK, as I said, has 80 gigawatts of electricity generating capacity. Now, 20% of that, it has a margin of 20% in that, so it only requires 60 gigawatts. And of course, we know that in the next couple of years, we're going to have to switch off a load of coal and oil-powered power stations. That's because of EU directives, but we've got nothing to replace them with. But anyway, this Strangford Lough is a very small project, which is why it's been allowed to go ahead, whereas the Bristol Barrage would provide 5% of the generating capacity of the UK. This particular thing is producing something like 1.5 megawatts. It's small, it's tiny, it's
1,500 homes.
1,500 homes, yeah.
But so the point is that we can do things when we think about it properly. I noticed that Northern Ireland project is Siemens, so presumably the profit's going back to a German company. Sorry to be a bit cynical for viewers there, but well, we should reward politicians for doing what they're doing so well, which is destroying the country. And little article here pointing out that basically politicians are demanding more payouts when they stand down from being an MP, so they want another 33,000. Just remember that against that pension figure of £146 a week. But the MPs are going to need another 33,000. Is it that they are beginning to realise people are saying, we want your jobs because you're not doing it properly?
That could be it, but what I find particularly disgusting about this is that MPs assume that when they get thrown out of their job, that, you know, at an election, somebody decides that this MP is no good, he gets sacked from his job, and he's entitled to a £33,000 payout.
Well, it's a reward for failure.
Exactly. If I get sacked from my job, you're not going to pay me £33,000.
Well, you don't get paid anyway, Mike. So,
right. So, so now they want to get paid £33,000 if they choose to leave their jobs. Now, if I choose to leave my job, not only do I not get a payout, but I'm not entitled to claim benefits.
Yeah.
So, these guys, there's something extremely screwy with their minds.
Well, I think they're living in the bunker mentality. They believe in their own world. They believe they're doing a good job. They've lost track of reality. But certainly if we're going to change Britain for the better, it seems to us that we need to get rid of the present lot of MPs and get some decent people in. Yeah. Common sense is what's needed. And of course, if we come onto a very serious subject, which seems to be drifting away from the mainstream press, we need common sense. And this is the Jimmy Savile affair. And we know that there are a great number of our listeners and viewers who want the UK column to stick with this story, and we certainly are, because it's quite clear that what we're actually watching is a very sophisticated cover-up. So the Mirror in that shot was actually picking up that there was no record of Jimmy Savile's sex abuse claims being held by police forces. So hundreds of assaults have gone on around the country. Some have been reported to police forces, but in other cases they don't seem to have any proper records. The Express over the weekend was really getting stuck into the subject by pointing out that I believe the lady is a psychiatrist or a therapist has dealt with victims who are absolutely saying that Jimmy Savile was involved in satanic abuse at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, and this lady has produced a very comprehensive statement on what these victims are talking about. I'm leading into something here, so we'll just follow this through. This was a diagram, I think from the Mail. If it wasn't the Mail, I apologise to the Mail, but I think it was the Mail, where they put a map and the numbers are reflecting the numbers of crimes committed all over the country. So from the publicity to date, we know that Jimmy Savile has been a prolific abuser within the BBC, abusing youngsters, young people on BBC property. He's been into hospitals, he's been into Broadmoor, he's been mixing with prime ministers, he's been spending a lot of time with the royal family. Now we're apparently got some sort of investigation underway. Let's look at what is being said about Jimmy Savile's abuses. Now this is a report that's come out over the last few days.
We talked about this on Friday.
Well, we're going to look at it in a bit more detail here, because it's a combination of David Gray, Superintendent with the Metropolitan Police Service, and Peter Watt, the Chief Executive of the NSPCC. And in the executive summary of this wonderful document, it says there is no clear evidence of Savile operating within a paedophile ring, although whether he was part of an informal network is part of the continuing investigation, and it's not therefore appropriate to comment further on this. Now, we've actually called the NSPCC to ask them what that statement actually means. He's not been working in a paedophile ring, he's been working in an informal network of paedophiles, presumably.
Is that not a paedophile ring?
Well, this is the question we've asked NSPCC, but the inference here is that, well, of course, all of these abuses were just done by Jimmy Savile. He was able to get in everywhere, schools, hospitals, because he was a celebrity. It's a problem. It's all happened. We can't do much about it. It's very interesting that Mr. Watt here is mentioned. This is a slightly historical article from the Telegraph. But of course, this man was a political advisor with the Labour Party. He's been involved in all sorts of things. He's absolutely deeply involved in Labour politics. And after many years of doing that, he suddenly comes into the charity sector, which has ultimately led him through to NSPCC. But many people that are talking to us about what is actually going on with the abuse of the children are saying that the government at the moment is adamant it doesn't want the investigation to start looking at senior politicians, judges and lords. And I don't know, there's something rather unsavoury that we've got somebody so intimately connected with the political system who's also here working with the police. And let's see what they're saying in this wonderful report. So in the concluding remarks, I pulled out 2 paragraphs. The first one says, it would be naive to view this case as the isolated behaviour of an individual rogue celebrity. We do, however, need to recognise the context of the 1960s and 70s, the peak offending period. It was an age of different social attitudes and the workings of the criminal justice system at the time would have reflected this. Even though the abuse committed was as illegal then as it is now, thankfully attitudes have changed considerably in a relatively short period of time. So just I'll hold that one there, Mike, and I'll do the other one. But essentially what they're trying to say here is, well, of course, there was a sexual liberation in the 60s, 70s. This was all old hat. They were abusing children then, but they're not abusing them now. Of course, we know the exact opposite is true by the number of people who are coming forward to talk about being abused. And as we've seen with the case of Holly Gregg alone, the moment the finger is pointed about people in the establishment, the police suddenly don't do their job. There's no proper investigation. So to our minds, this report from the police and NSPCC is disingenuous at best and is a cover-up at worst. The second paragraph says the questions asked by victims were, how was Saville able to offend over so many years? Why wasn't he stopped, and could it ever happen again? The accounts victims have provided showing the pattern of his behaviour and the protection from public exposure his celebrity status appears to have afforded goes some way to answering the first two questions. So this man was just working in a very casual, social, paedophile environment, and why was he allowed to do it? Because he was a celebrity.
The question in my mind is, if he was working in this informal group of paedophiles, perhaps he was providing
children for politicians and
on
police.
An informal basis. So perhaps he had something on these people, which is why he was allowed to get away with it for so long. Yeah.
Well, this the report is available. Just go on the internet and put in the title of that NSPCC report. You can download it as a PDF, and I'd encourage people to have a look at it for its sheer artistry with English language. It's a cover-up, in my opinion. Just having a look at a couple of bits at the end. This is part of Appendix A, which is saying to provide a proportional and consistent policing response, putting the victims or potential victims at the heart of our work. What I'm getting at here is that these are some of the terms of reference for Operation Yewtree, and what they're really not saying in any ruthless way is we are going to investigate and we're going to bring the perpetrators of these crimes to justice. There's woolly language about trying to get closure for the victims by bringing them further into the circle of organisations which clearly are failing to help victims in the first place. Disingenuous, or is this nudging? Is this playing around with people's minds? And if we look at their Appendix B, this is to do with the Gold Group. They're going to provide strategic oversight for Operation Yewtree through the coordination of a multi-agency response. That's pretty clear, isn't it? Who's in charge? Multi-agency. And the objectives are to ensure that public and victim confidence is maintained, to support and enable the senior investigating officer to deliver a proportional policing response through his strategic intentions. Do you understand what that means, Mike?
I haven't got a clue, but this multi-agency response, is this so that when nothing happens, they can all point fingers at each other?
When nothing happens, they can all protect each other's backs with the wagon train. But of course, the thing is that if you lead outside authority, which is what Common Purpose encourages people to do, then organisations who shouldn't have any business being near a police investigation are actually interfering with what the police are doing. It's our view there is a cover-up at work over Jimmy Savile, and the purpose of that cover-up is to protect paedophiles at the top of the British establishment. We just cover two more points on this subject, but another Mail article here which was pointing out that this lady here, Deborah Cougar, I think is her name, Cogger, sorry, I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but she is outraged, and I think quite rightly so, because she's discovered that police who failed to do their duty properly in previous investigations have now been brought back in to look at the present Jimmy Savile investigation. Now, she's outraged at this. UK column is absolutely not surprised, because this is the common technique of the police in covering up either mistakes or certainly incompetence or conspiracy, is to bring in the same people who were used to do it the first time round to carry it out second time.
Did they fail the first time round? That's the question that always springs to my mind. Did they fail? What were they actually there to do?
Well, if they were there to cover up the first time round,
And they didn't fail.
They didn't fail, so bring them back in for another bite at the cherry. But of course, the failure of Thames Valley Police to investigate the horrific sexual and physical abuses at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College mirror this, because detectives who failed to investigate victims properly at the college have again been brought in when further complaints have been made. And a member of our audience called in shortly before the show and said to us that we might like to ask a key question, and that is, who nominated Saville for his knighthood? And the second question is, why will the establishment not reveal the name or the names of those people who put him forward for his award? Now, surely if these people were just deceived, they're going to be very embarrassed, but they've nothing else to hide. But for some reason, the establishment doesn't want us to know who put him forward for his knighthood. Sorry, that's a picture of Prince Charles in the picture with Jimmy Savile. And this is back to the smokescreen of publicity and media that we see at the moment. Here's the Telegraph producing what? A non-article that the police minister has got a strong sex drive.
That's nice for him.
He's heterosexual, so here he is. He's good in bed, ladies, and the Telegraph has spent probably several £1,000s bringing that to our attention. Well done, Daily Telegraph. So that brings us to the end of the news. It's becoming very clear, not only from what we see, from the comments viewers and listeners are making to us, that more and more people are waking up to the reality something's wrong in Britain. Massive state propaganda, led by the BBC, of course, but is beginning to distort reality. If in doubt, apply common sense and your own good reasoning on what's going on. Do research yourself. Any other points?
Nope.
That brings us to the end of today's programme. Thank you for joining us.
See you tomorrow.